How's things been?
Good. How are things with you?
Things are good, dude. First of all, the our first episode we did, the response I got from that episode was insane.
Mhm.
It was so
Cool.
positive. I think it was in like the first 30 episodes I did, and
Hmm.
in that time period, it tripled the audience just
Oh,
from
really?
our
Good.
episode. So, ton of gratitude for that. That was awesome.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear. It's an exciting topic. It kind of gets people like, what did he just say? They want to know more.
And it's so contrarian to the way
Yeah.
we view things. But when you hear like yourself talk about it, it just makes sense. Like it's funny. Like the analogy that just rang so true for me that made it make so much sense, right? If and I think you guys, it's like the Saquon Barkley analogy
Hmm.
that like
Hmm.
Saquon has like the biggest legs, strongest legs. So you would think that that would equate to less injuries,
Hmm.
but that just isn't the case.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that Goata forces you to ask a lot of questions. It forces you to confront a lot of preconceived notions,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a difficult thing. It's difficult for me to do at the beginning. It's difficult for Gary to do. It's difficult for Gilly. But as you start to really think these things through, you come to the conclusion, like you just said, where you're like, gosh, this makes a lot of sense. If you really give the evidence its due diligence, you start to
Totally.
come to the same conclusion.
And it's pretty much it's exploded. Like I've seen people since the last time we talked. It's been this thing that has grown significantly since the last time we've talked.
Yeah, it's been really good the last we started this new style of delivering the information this past July. So our cert in the past had been set up as a 3-day lab weekend. So people would have to come to us, and you're trying to jam pack this information into 3 days. And what we've done now is we've created a cohort with the information. So now it is a 3-week masterclass introduction to Goda. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times people are trying to learn this thing through Instagram. As you know, anything you're trying to learn through Instagram can be very difficult. I think podcasts are great because we can go long form, but trying to dive into the details of the global laws and what we're really saying just from posts and comment sections it's nauseating. And we ran that route for a few years. But now that we've switched to this 3-week masterclass, we get people into a community type vibe. We jump on 3 Zoom calls with them. We have all this material organized to help explain the philosophy, the theory, the origin. We show them our first 8 or so groundwork exercises and get them feeling what it does to the system when you start to replicate these movements. It's been great because we're seeing 20 people in a class, 3 classes every Friday, plus our level 2 coaches that are going for sort of the full deep dive and the full understanding of the system. So we're in front of a lot more people on the regular each week. And I think that the word of mouth has become more positive and there's just much more clarity. We've had a lot of people show up. They're like, I've been looking at this for 2 years, but I didn't quite know or I didn't quite understand. Oh, let me jump in this 3-week masterclass. And now
Mm-hmm.
they're like, oh, that's what you're trying to say. So we've tried to clean up our end and our delivery and the way that we handle ourselves to do a better job of kind of presenting this information. So I think that's what you're feeling. That's what I've noticed too, is that it's just like more and more people are starting to think about, I think big picture is movement versus the old school sort of isolation training. People are kind of talking in integration. They're talking about harmony. They're starting to see what we keep telling people in the level 1 is we're saying musculoskeletal system. Why are we treating it like musculoskeletal parts? Why do we do that? Why do we treat it like a GI Joe and a Lego, but then we want it to move like a wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have to kind of catalog, diagnose, and treat it like the wave, not treat it like the GI Joe. So I think that big concept, that macro view, that doesn't necessarily have to be just relegated to Goda because we're not the only ones that are speaking that way. But I've seen that start to creep more into the mainstream, which is great because that's a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, you guys are absolutely doing a great job with it. I had I think maybe like 6 months ago, I got a call from my brother one day, And he's like, dude, I just went to this yoga class, and it was Goga. They called it Goga. It
Oh,
was Goda
okay.
yoga,
Yeah,
and it was combining like all your groundwork stuff with some
sure.
yoga principles. And he was like, it was the best thing ever. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Um, but I just thought that was a super cool combination of like this traditional thing that we've seen for a long time that
Hmm.
maybe has some issues in it when you look at like from your guys' philosophy, but combining it with your approach, it's so cool to see how things are evolving towards this more holistic approach.
Yeah. The cool thing about Goda, sometimes the tough part about us from a business perspective, when you listen to people talk about, honing in your business and trying to find your niche market and who is this for? People like ask me like, who's Goda for? I'm like, everyone. Like, it's like
Yes.
that's not a smart move necessarily when you're
Yeah.
actually going to market because you want to find the direct sort of niche that you speak to the best. But the reality is that we're identifying something that's inherent or innate in all of us. And when you do that, your stretch is very, very wide, right? And there's a lot of depth to the GOTA system in the sense that what we've tried to provide is, I like to say it this way to folks is, it's a full system. It's got everything you need here from that PT therapeutic type of lens where you're doing the assessment, you're honing in on your specific issues, you're going about correcting those issues. But then it also has the workout side, the strength and conditioning side, and working out can be, sort of served up in a yoga class. It could be served up in a bar class. It could be served up in a martial arts class that's more movement based, or it could be your traditional Power Five football conference strength and conditioning, right? All of these different, seemingly different ways to load and progressively overload and challenge the skill of the system all have ways that they could be up leveled by understanding a more common sense blueprint to movement. And why I think Goda resonates a lot with martial artists. We have a lot of jujitsu people come through. We have a lot of traditional martial artists, a lot of UFC, MMA type of disciplines that show up, and a lot of yoga type of disciplines as well, is because we use a similar, I call it that Tai Chi approach, where
Mhm.
if you can do it slow, you can do it fast, right? If we're going to change habit, we're going to change behavior, and we instinctively know this. If you're an athlete, you know that you slow it down, you rep it out, you break it down piece by piece, and then you can start to ramp up the speed and go faster. And that's how we retrain the body with Goda. So I think that harmonizes with the yoga community. I think that harmonizes with the martial artist, with the person that's trying to perfect the skill. And we look at the bow in the corner. We look at these global laws as skills that, if you don't use it, you can lose it, right? But if you're using it and you're sort of replicating it in your day to day and it's at the forefront of your brain, it has to latch onto that behavior. So we have this powerful ability to subdue a habit, a bad habit, with another habit. Thank goodness, right? You can get out of bad habits, but in order to get out of that bad habit, you have to replace it with a good one. So our whole concept is changing habits, changing behaviors, and moving slow as we do that. I think it harmonizes a lot with certain communities, but it is cool to see it start to trickle into even bodybuilders, power lifters, Olympic lifters, strength coaches. They're starting to see the benefits as maybe more of a warm up, cool down, or sort of a sprinkle in to their system. So it's cool because it has that stretch.
Absolutely. And so, for those that have not heard about your guys' philosophy before, can you give us like that overview of what
Yeah.
the Go the method is and how you kind of describe that philosophy?
Yeah. So the GOTA movement, GOTA stands for greatest of all time actions. And what we're doing differently is that we're studying the innate patterns of movement and rest of the world's most durable humans. And that was started with the founder, Jose Bosch. We call him Coach Gilly. And he asked the question, how does the body travel through space for a lifetime and never get hurt for no apparent reason? And he had been wrecked himself, and he had sort of asked this question and was willing to, being someone who's on sort of the outside of the typical, like we say, strength and conditioning, physiotherapist. He wasn't in that world. So he was looking at it through a different lens, and he was just looking at the world's most durable humans, and he broke it down to some simple tribes that we can hone in on: the developing child, the indigenous cultures, the decade plus super freak athlete, and the 70 plus age group at the track and field world championships. And that's really where he kind of honed his eye in. And that's where we started to see and group the world's most durable humans, almost put them in a sifter and say, okay, what patterns, what common denominators, what's the best of the best here that sort of works through this sift and we can use to assess and train. And so the Goata system, with that lens of looking at the world's most durable humans and their innate sort of patterns of movement and rest, we now have a system that we can assess and we can train to. And this blueprint is much different than what's been presented beforehand. So we look at it as an integrated system. We look at it as an integrated cycle. In every inherent integrated cycle inside the human body, there's something being moved. And we've used that sort of same outlook for the musculoskeletal. And so we are cataloging, diagnosing, and treating the musculoskeletal as a system for, as we would say, really the first time. It's been hinted at, it's been brought to the forefront from certain systems, but never at a point where it's this organized, this detailed, and can be stretched out from the assessment to the correctives all the way through to the strength and conditioning.
It's funny that your Instagram name used to be Red Pill Rick, because it definitely is like this red pill that you hear this philosophy, you start to see it in practice, you start to understand, okay, this is why you guys believe what you guys believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go about your life and you just start seeing things, and it makes you you start seeing people walk in the street, and you see like the I don't even know how would you describe it, like when people's the
Crooked.
like crooked feet. And then like this past summer I was training every day with a friend who was at a big time college football program. And we were doing his like off season workouts, and or we were going to do his off season workouts, and then I was like, this is nonsense. Like the amount of which they were like putting their body under load and compressing their body and like forcing that crooked feet because of how tight they were becoming. It blew my mind. And then you see the rate at which torn ACLs are happening. You know, there was like all that debate this season in the NFL with like torn Achilles and torn ACLs about like turf fields and all this shit. And you're just like, oh, maybe there's more to the story here, that maybe we're just moving in a direction that's causing our bodies to respond in this way.
Yeah, we liken it to, and we've obviously identified with an issue that is being seen across multiple genres, right? The fans are seeing it, the announcers are seeing it, the teams are seeing it, the league is seeing it. They're going even to the lengths of, man, is it the field that we're running on? So the questions are being asked. Now, when you dive deeper into the why of the injuries, we have a few theories that we think are worth sharing and are worth exploring and thinking through. And it really starts with, do you believe that the body is designed? Do you believe that it's intelligently organized to carry something out? Or do you believe that it's just kind of do what thou wilt with it, right? Can you do whatever you want with the system? I believe that it's intelligently designed. I believe that it's created in an image, and I believe that it's built to work a specific way. I think that there's inherent designs to the anatomical structures, right? It's trying to tell you something with its shape, with its organization, with its sewing of the connective tissue and where things are placed. And so when you look into that, and what we've done with Goata is we liken, as I said earlier, the musculoskeletal system. Look around at how you have cataloged, diagnosed, and treated other systems of the body. So they got it right in certain systems, but I think that they got it wrong in the musculoskeletal. Like we said earlier, we don't treat it as a musculoskeletal system. We say that word, But when we go to catalog, diagnose, and treat it, we look at it as the musculoskeletal parts and pieces.
Mhm.
So if you're looking at the other systems of the body, something's going to jump out at you. If I say cardiovascular, you picture the cardiovascular. Right now, you're picturing blood pumping through. You're picturing an inherent cycle to that system that's being repped out thousands of times a day. Stretch that out over a lifetime. I say digestive, same thing. You picture the full system. You picture something moving through that system in a cycle that's being repped out thousands of times a day, stretched out over a lifetime. I say respiratory, same thing. Now we look at the musculoskeletal. It's now become this isolated parts, isolated pieces approach. People aren't looking for a cycle, let alone what is being moved through that cycle thousands of times a day. I think as I'm saying that, you start to think about, well, what's the thing that the musculoskeletal does thousands of times a day? It's on your watch, it's on your phone, it's your step. It's this ability to affect change on the environment. To move from point A to point B, it all boils down to that. If I can't go and move from point A to point B, by definition, I'm a vegetable, right? The whole system will
Mhm.
shut down. So this becomes your most important skill set to go live, right? To go and affect change and to go allocate resources, to go eat, to go build communities, to go do all these things. It all boils down to movement. Now, if we look at that pattern of point A to point B, that inherent cycle that plays out, we look at the walk as the breath pattern, as the cardiovascular, right? And now you have to ask, well, what's this thing that the musculoskeletal is moving? It's a little more elusive and not as easy to identify as it is for the blood, the air, the digestive. I think that you can see it much cleaner there. But with the musculoskeletal, it starts to kind of become a little bit more challenging. This was why the slow motion video was so important when Gilly was identifying these behaviors. And this is why he started to call it a pressure wave. Because when you watch the body in slow motion, what you're watching is you're seeing it organize pressure. And now you can see how the skeletal compartments are deforming. Deforming doesn't mean good or bad, but they're changing shape as pressure is organizing through those compartments. So now if you think about your step, what do? I'm standing still. I want to walk forward. I want to take a step forward with my left foot. Well, I've got to go ahead and drop my pressure into my right leg. I got to load it up, transfer it over to the left side. And then I repeat that process. So there's a wave of pressure that's going from the right side to the left side and back every single step of your day. Now, the way that we organize, the way that we load, the way that we transfer, and the way that we reset and get ready to do that pressure wave all over again is innate. It is structured. It has specific details to it. And so what you see is that when you're looking at it that way, and then as you start to explore further and you say, okay, I'm going to look at, and I now see the walk as a song on the radio. And what I mean by that is the same song is playing, okay, but I could turn the volume down or I could turn the volume up. Now think of your walking cycle as this overarching pattern of forward movement, which if I turn that dial up from the walk and I turn that song a little bit louder, it becomes a jog. I turn it a little bit louder, it becomes a run. A little bit louder, it becomes a cut, juke, jump, throw, swing, strike. All these seemingly different patterns of movement all boil down to this simple pressure wave exchange of load one side, transfer it, load one side, transfer it, and reset in between. And what we show people is that if you look back, as we just said a few moments ago, if you look at the musculoskeletal macro view, zoom out for a second, stop thinking isolated ranges, isolated planes. We already know damn well that there's no isolated structure. It's all blended. It's a bioflow, so to speak. This was brought forth by the great work from Dr. Andrea Spina in FRC. He showed people that, look, there's no glute, there's no Achilles tendon necessarily. They're all just, they don't exist outside of themselves. They're all interconnected and they're all just one big suit. Okay, so if we're looking at this design, and then we also know that there's no such thing as single plane movement. You move three planes simultaneously. Well, if you take three planes of movement and you combine it, you get a spiral. So three planes of movement combined equals a spiral. Now, as we look further at the bigger picture, the sewing of the musculature, the sewing of some of these sort of changes in structure, when you get to, let's say, the Achilles tendon, what you start to notice is you start to notice that there's a spiral that's built into the structure, right? There's certain designs inside the structure. There's certain ways to load an Achilles tendon. There's certain ways to load the leg, to load the spine. And so when you're looking at that information of it's an integrated system, it's not a GI Joe where you can pop the arm off and throw it to the side. It's one integrated system, and that integrated system has a certain sewing, has a certain setup, and inside of that certain setup or that certain sewing, there's a wave of pressure, meaning you're going to take the weight of the suit and you're going to actually drop it back into the suit. And you're going to drop that weight into the suit, and like a pogo stick, your leg is going to load, and it's going to use that spring-like spiral qualities to then load and transfer. It's going to repeat this spiral pattern throughout the day. When you understand that that spiral pattern that moves you forward through space is the thing of the musculoskeletal, it is the operating system, well, it completely changes the game. Now you got to assess differently. Now you have to correct differently. Now you have to strength train differently. And of course, you're going to be seemingly polar opposite of someone that's coming at it from, no, this is the sagittal plane. This is the frontal plane. This is the transverse plane. That's the humerus. That's the glute. They're looking at it as isolated parts, isolated pieces versus integrated parts, integrated pieces that are working in a cycle. So when you have those differences in play, if it is supposed to be this way, an integrated system that's moving something inside of a cycle, but the training world, the medical world accidentally identified it as isolated parts, isolated pieces, and you go to train that and it's not built that way to work that way, and you draw that out over 3 decades, you have the injury epidemic that you see playing out, not only in sports because of the way the training is being done, but we've also looked at, as I said earlier, the innate patterns of movement and rest. So this goes further than the training. This is a lifestyle approach that is starting to be talked about. The way that we rest also affects this system. And so when you look at it wholesale and you take the big picture macro view, you start to see, wow, we are way off our mark, not only in how we're moving, but also in how we're resting. I can see why the joint replacements are so high. I can see why the ACLs and the Achilles are so high. We're just simply disorganized off of this innate blueprint. But good news is, if it got warped and mismanaged because of the bad inputs that we put in, well, we can reorganize and reintegrate by putting good patterns and good inputs in. And so that's what the recode does. That's why it's so polarizing, is because it is saying you got the wrong map, you got the wrong blueprint. But the good news is that we can fix those things if we just change the way that we're viewing the system.
It's fascinating how you could kind of take exactly what you just said and I mean, it's just the perfect parallel to this chronic disease epidemic that we're going on with the food system, and we have
Right.
this huge like skyrocketing in chronic disease and in
Mm-hmm.
inflammatory diseases, right? And it's like um, you could really just break it down as like a disconnection to how we were supposed to eat and a disconnection to how we were supposed to move. And
Yes.
when you return back to those natural patterns, things tend to fix themselves. And whenever I'm explaining like the Goata system to somebody, and I just in person, I could do this. It's so easy. It's like um, stick your foot out crooked, and then put apply pressure on your big toe, and then put pressure, like take your hand and put pressure on the outside part of your knee, and
Mm-hmm.
you could feel your ACL pulling. And I'm like, that is what all these guys who are running crooked toe are doing all day, every day. And
Mm-hmm.
then those like micro tears and that pressure is just culminating to torn ACLs and injuries and just all this stuff. And I mean, simply just by doing that, you can feel exactly why these injuries are skyrocketing.
Yeah, I think that there is like you said earlier when you were talking about, man, once I see this, I can't unsee it. It's everywhere. There is a natural aesthetics that we are drawn to. Okay, this was done in a similar light by the great work of John and Mike Mew, which I'm sure you've heard of mewing if you're in the
Yep.
natural world, right? The tongue posture, and they did a similar approach, just structurally only looking at the face, but similar idea to what Gilly was doing with the whole musculoskeletal as far as the movement pattern goes. They were looking at, well, what's natural as far as the organization of the skull structure, the organization of the tongue, the mouth, right, the breathing, all these things. What's it meant to do? They looked at indigenous cultures, right? They looked at those types of skulls and said, hey, something's off with the way we're doing it. And then once that's drawn to your attention and you start to look around, you're like, yeah, I guess it is a lot prettier when the cheekbones are high than when the cheekbones are low. Yeah, I guess it is a lot prettier when the jaw is set this way versus recessed and pulled back this way. You don't need to be a doctor or need to have studied facial structure to say that person's pretty, that person's ugly. Whether that's intense or not, the reality is you're doing that judgment every single day. So you can see a natural aesthetic playing out, a natural thing that you're drawn to with human bodies. You could see this in the face. What you've just proven is that you can also see it at the foot. You could look down at two sets of feet and I could show you someone that's Goata. I could show you someone that's Wota. I could show you a Goata landing pattern. I can show you a Wota landing pattern. I can show you a Goata transferring of pressure pattern. I can show you a Wota transferring of pressure pattern. And instinctively, if you're being objective, you'll know which one's prettier. You'll know
Mm-hmm.
which one looks more organized. So I think, well, we hypothesize that this is something that's very innate. And this was shown by the great work of Philip Beach in the book Muscles and Meridians, which maybe I brought it up last time. It's one of my favorites. I talk about it all the time. But what he did in the early chapters of that book is that he showed the embryological perspective of human development, meaning that like this thing churns out the same way, barring, obvious malfunctions. It's got a set way of developing, right? There's a set structure to the leg musculature. I'm no different than you in that sense, right? We're all the same if we look at it a certain way. And so when you look at this sort of inherent design that's being replicated in the womb, that's with you. That's there. Like I tell people, we're all Goatas. It's just how far off the mark are you when you realize it? Because the second that you came out of the womb, yeah, maybe you're Goata, but then your parents stuff you in a sneaker. By the time you leave the hospital, you're already in your front chain, laying in a chair in the carrier, right? You're already subject to this new world that we live in of the tables and the chairs and funky shoes that because the nervous system's so malleable, you can start to move away from it, right? The nervous system's a servant to the environment. It does what it's told to do based off of the inputs that are being put in. But I believe that there's something instinctual about this stuff that when you look at it and you think about it for a second objectively, you're like, man, I resonate with that. I can feel that. I understand that. And I use this with our young athletes. I coach quarterbacks at my high school and I'm in camps every now and again. And I want to get across to them that, hey, you can't do anything explosive, bouncy, athletic through the heel of the foot, right? So when you want to start moving from point A to point B athletically, you can't do it through the heel. So what I'll show them is, hey, start bouncing up and down on the balls of your feet. And they'll go, okay, I feel like a kangaroo, right? Nice and springy. I'll say, okay, stop. Now start to bounce up and down on your heels. And they'll kind of look at you funny and they'll try to bounce up and down. It's like stones hitting the ground. There's no elasticity through the heel. And I'm like, look, there's a natural way to use the body, right? There's a natural common sense that you inherently know. Like when I said jump through your heels, without having being a jump expert, you knew it didn't make any sense to you. Just like when you look at straight feet versus crooked feet, yeah, it makes more sense that if I'm walking that way, I think my feet should point that way. And so there's a case of I think we created a little bit of paralysis by analysis in some of the ways that we overcomplicated something that is so seemingly simple. Like you just drew the analogy of processed food versus natural food. You didn't really need someone to tell you that Pop-Tarts and cornflakes aren't good for you. But once somebody said it, you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I should eat fruit, vegetables, and meat. Like, well, duh, that's what's of the earth, right? So that's, there's processed food, there's processed movement, there's natural food, there's natural movement. When you stop and you actually are shown both sides of it, you have your common sense moment.
It's so funny. There are two really funny things there that just reminded me of. One is that now, because of you, if I see a girl walking and she's really woda with the crooked feet, it's a bit of a turn off, dude. I have to say, it's like,
Good.
ooh.
Good.
Um, but the second thing there, which is funny, is just a quick story of I was hanging out with a friend and these two girls, and one of them was like perfectly Goata, like
Mm,
as good as it gets.
right.
And I brought it up to the 2 year olds, and then I was like explaining it to them, and then the one girl who wasn't Goata, so she was like so talking to the other girl, she was like, so do you get back pain or anything? And the girl's like, no, like she like when she and she was she's like, what, like why would I have back pain? And the other girl's like, I have so much back pain. But it was just funny, like the to see that in action. I mean, there's just so much truth. I love the analogy of process movement versus natural movement, and it applies to so much more than just movement. It's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, I tell this to our coaches, especially our level 2 coaches that are getting the full deep dive of the system. And I say, let you're already doing it naturally. Like I'm sure when you first learned about Goda, you inherently, like the first thing I did is I'm looking down at my feet and I'm like, how do I stack up? Like, this should explain itself through my body as well. And when I had my, first assessment and I saw myself run, I was like, well, that's why your knee hurts. That's why your back hurts. That's why you're getting confirmation. So I tell them, I'm like, WODA and GODA continually confirm themselves every single day, every single year. And that's why it's getting more hyperbolic, is because you can't run away from the truth once it's exposed. So now that we've exposed it and we've put it in front of your face, you may not agree with it. And I have this happen all the time in our level 1. People come in and like, yeah, I saw it 2 years ago, thought you guys were assholes, thought it was total bullshit. And then it hit me. And I'm like, well, yeah, you've seen the movie Inception, right? Where Leo plants the idea, but it only comes to fruition 6 months, 12 months later. We're performing inceptions on people every single day on Instagram, whether they know it, whether they like it or not. It's happening to you. There's nothing that you can do to get away from it because it's truth. It's inherent. Like I said, with the cheekbone high, cheekbone low, no one's going to sit there and say the cheekbone low girl is prettier than the cheekbone high girl. You'd be an idiot. Well, eventually someone's going to realize that, and the whole world's going to see, yeah, no shit, it's inner ankle bone high. Of course it's not inner ankle bone low. At one point, it will get to that. And so WODA and GODA continue to confirm themselves. Every year on the football field, they continue to confirm themselves. Every ACL, it confirms itself. Every Achilles tear, it confirms itself. Every person that we do an assessment on that scores low in our assessment rubric confirms it. Everyone that we see that scores high confirms GODA. And so it's something that's going to continually play out in your life. You'll notice it in your own body. You'll start to look around at your friends group like that young lady did, where she's like, well, my back hurts. And then she's more aware of crooked feet. And then she thinks about her friend, Susie Q or Joni, and they're, oh, yeah, she has crooked feet and she's hurt too. Oh, well, she's got straight feet and got these bows and corners and she's not hurt. People start to do this in their own lives, in their own communities. They start to see it play out on large scale in the NFL. And that's why we used to call it red pill, because it slowly starts like, oh my gosh, you pull back this veil and you're like, is everything I know wrong? It's like, well, there's fragments of truth everywhere, but the whole picture truth is seldom placed in front of you. And I think that's what is so polarizing about GOTA, is that it's just the first time you see it, it's just this, it slaps you across the face and you're like, you have a reaction to that. And I think that the natural reaction is dependent upon this cup that you carry around. I heard this great analogy before. I don't remember exactly where it was, but there, we all have these cups that are, they're either, they're filled with preconceived notions, right? And most people have a full cup. And a lot of people do searching, they're seekers, right? And those seekers, those people that are looking for truth, they end up pouring the cup out slowly, little bits at a time. And once that cup is empty, the truth is ready to fill it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that depending on how much you have in your cup depends on how ready you are to receive that truthful information, right? That objective lens that Goata puts on it. And I've seen that where people show up and the cup is full and they're not quite ready to hear it. And what I've tried to do, and like what you brought up about like Goata looks like it's blowing up, is we've tried to understand that better as owners of it, and to try to show people and to know that if somebody shows up with a full cup, don't yell at them, right? Have pity, have love for where they're at, because the reality is at some point I had a full cup too. And if somebody showed me this at the wrong time, I would have scoffed at it just as well. So I'm no better than anybody else. It's just dependent on where I'm at in my current situation and what I've gone through. I was fortunate enough on my journey from 2011 till I met Gilly and Gary that I was unknowingly just, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. I tried it all objectively because I'm trying to stay on a football field, trying to stay on a roster, to the point where I'm like, somebody give me something that makes sense. Somebody give me something that reverberates deep into my soul. And once I listened to Gilly and Gary talk, I was like, fill it up, put it in there. I'm ready for this truth to be there. And that's the difference, is that you have to understand where you're at, but you also have to let the evidence speak for itself. And I respect people that do let the evidence speak for themselves. What we've tried to do with the level 1 is to create an environment away from Instagram where it's freaking chaotic and it's all over the place, and come over here. Let us distill this information. Let us put an order behind it so that you can really understand it. I want you to understand it. It's better for you that you understand it. And that's been the huge difference and sort of the goal as you look at stretching Goata out into the communities, into the world as we move into the future.
I went to the University of Miami, and my senior year, for some reason, just how schedules work, I was on. I would walk the same path every Wednesday, and I would run into Ed Reed every single Wednesday,
Oh, the GOAT.
because he was a football coach at the program, and it would talk about Goda, man. That guy has it was mind blowing to me. It was just the perfect movement pattern. And just seeing that in action and knowing how resilient he was in his career, it was like, oh shit, like
Mm-hmm.
it's so cool to see that in action, in person, someone with those movement patterns that has done this at such a high level and performed at such a high level
Mm-hmm.
with injury free. And to just see that, it's crazy to see every day, just or every Wednesday, how perfect those movement patterns are, because there's such few people out there that actually have those patterns.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing when you see it. It's becoming more and more rare to see it. So when
Yep.
you do see a Goata, it's like, oh my gosh, look, there's a Goata. I got 4 kids, so now that we're in the circuit of like running sports every weekend, and you're at these practices and you're at these games, well, there's more Goatas in the younger population just by default because they're
Yep.
closer to the source. So like my wife and I will sit there and I'm like, there's one, like there's a pure Goata right there. Like, and then they'll be like, oh man, this poor kid lost it already. And it's like, you realize that, look, you're a product of your environment in so many ways. We know this. We know that habits are something that are a fact of our life in many facets, right? We talk about diets just a second ago. You have diet habits. Okay. You've also got movement habits that you're just not quite aware of right now. And those habits can be shaped, they can be changed. I think that we could change the whole trajectory of injury and really the whole path that you see the human system going as far as sports injuries and joint replacements, if we made one simple change, which big picture is getting back to the ground, but furthermore, how do we integrate that to the society, is you put a floor desk in the schools, because I think that this is just such a malleable moment in the human development process of child developing, going into first grade, stretching that out from first to eighth, and then working into high school. This is where we see the largest decode take place, right? The biggest change and the biggest drastic movement from the WOTA side to the Goata side. And then it kind of just gets worse and worse and worse until they're 35 to 55 and they're sitting in our level 1 course and they're like, my back's in shambles, my knee hurts, fix it. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to go back to when you were 6 to 7 months old and we're going to start rocking. Like, what? I'm like, listen, this is where you lost it. This is what we're going to go back to. But there's some simple changes that could be made in our lifestyle. And that's a big part of this. I know we talk about the training, and that's a definitely a big piece of the pie. But if you're looking at why, like you said, why are so many people losing this when, okay, a small population of people are really the athletes, why is the larger sum total losing it as well? Well, it is intimately linked to not just weight training and how that goes out. It's your walk, it's your standing, it's your sitting. Sitting isn't the issue. Where you're sitting, how you're organizing that system in the sitting moment is the problem, right? They thought that, oh, we'll just interject standing desks and this will fix the issue. It's not the issue. You need to rest. Sitting's not the problem, right? They've even done studies where they show that, well, the hunter-gatherers actually aren't moving that much more than we are on average, right? Obviously, when they go for a hunt, they're really putting the miles on the system, but they're still sitting, right? They're still resting. The difference is they're sitting on the ground like the child is for the most part before he gets to school. They're organizing on the ground, right? Watch a child try to sit in a chair. They sit on the chair like as if it was the ground. You have to tell them, believe me, I got 4. Sit on your butt, put your feet forward, right? You have to show them how to sit because this is where it's being lost at first in the population. This is where you're seeing people that, man, I have an aunt or an uncle. You know, Rick, I got somebody that they never played sports. They never touched a weight, but they're broken in WOTA. How did it happen? Well, it started with this chair. It started with this shoe. It started with changing the resting postures. And this is another brilliant quote by Philip Beach. And he says this in his book. He has a whole chapter on this, these resting archetypes, the big focus of his book. And his method is movement and rest are flip sides of the same coin. He's like, think about it. Movement implies rest. Rest implies movement, right? It's the duality of the situation. You only know left because you know right. You only know up because you know down. It's a dualistic type of society. It is a binary world. And this is evident also in the movement and rest. And what's more fascinating about it is that if you look at the work from Philip Beach, whether you look at the embryological perspective and how he showed how the sewing of the leg musculature is on an inward spiral. And so the leg works like a pogo stick to where when it loads, it goes out and then comes back in, and then goes out, then comes back in. And Gilly's over here looking at the slow motion video and he's going, yeah, the foot straight and the leg goes out and then it comes back in. And so you see the evidence for durability, not only in the movement, but in the rest. But the cool part is that the resting shapes will imply the movement shapes. So how you're resting matters because how you're organizing your system in those moments of rest keep the body tuned up for the subsequent movement that follows. So if we can make that change, we can fix a lot of people. That's what our level 1 does. We focus on the ground. We show people how to get back into these ground resting postures, how to use intentful, disciplined exercises or drills in these resting shapes, and then how to also steal a few reps throughout their day by not sitting in that chair, but by reorganizing back to the ground and letting these innate postures, these innate ways of organizing your system that are very commonsensical once you stop and look at it, they start to reform and reshape your body quite literally to where you change habits, you change movement. Just like we talked about with the diet, you stop eating processed food, holy shit, I feel better. Well, I'm not drinking Dr. Pepper and eating Pop-Tarts at night, right? I'm eating red meat and I'm having my fruits and I'm having my vegetables and I'm drinking more water and I feel better. No shit. Okay, well, think the same way with your movement. If you start putting better movement habits into the system, better movement inputs, guess what's on the other side of that? A better feeling overall through your musculoskeletal system, which reverberates to all the other systems as well.
Something that confirmed that for me, exactly what you're saying, is girls tend to, just from looking in terms of population and being aware of these things, girls tend to be much more Goata than guys, just observationally. And my hypothesis there is girls' resting positions or
Mm.
resting postures are much better than guys' resting postures.
I
If you look
think
at a
there's
girl,
some logic to it.
they sit crisscross applesauce a lot. They
Yeah.
sit in seiza a lot more. They taught to be more ladylike, so they don't spread
Mm-hmm.
their legs real
Right.
wide. And I don't know. I think all those things kind of cultivate to, on average, girls being more Goata than guys.
I think there's a lot of logic to what you just said. I think as you look around, there is some truth to the resting postures and habits, societal habits. I think it
Mm-hmm.
gets back to just kind of looking at the habits of society and what are the norms and, the things that we are more accepted of doing, like you said, just certain sitting postures, yeah, are more ladylike. I think, the mother, the girl is a more nurturing type of character. They're more likely to be on the ground with the kid and they're more in those environments as well. And I know like I said, I coach athletes, I coach quarterbacks at my high school. And I've noticed, I'm like, I see the volleyball team and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of Gotas on the volleyball team. They're like back to back state champion winners. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of like natural Gotas on the volleyball team. And then I look at our football team and it's not quite the same. There are still sprinkled in
Mm-hmm.
natural Gotas. But yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to more straight footers in the lady population at
Mm-hmm.
times. Um, I also think that, depending on your derivative of sport, it can be a huge influence for ladies in
Mm-hmm.
the wrong direction as well. Like we've had a lot of dancers or ballet that kind of come
Mm,
in wrecked because of
that
the
makes
way the
sense.
foot's being organized. But somewhere like volleyball, where it's more two-way go, more jumping, more straight foot to create sort of a stronger anchoring point. I think it's natural to notice that some of these populations gravitate more so towards Goda behaviors than Woda.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that 80-20 of Goda, because you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned some simple changes, rockers, things that aren't these huge lifestyle changes, but will make a big impact. What do you think the 80-20 of Goda would be?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is something I echo a lot to the level one coach, to the level two coach, to anybody that's going through a recode with me is that when you're looking at habits, okay, so a habit is going to subdue another habit. So we need GOTA to fill up that sort of 80% of the day to some degree, right? We've got to start to first have the awareness of what am I doing throughout my day as it pertains to my standing, my walking, my resting, my inputs of GOTA. So when we start people is when we take them through the level one, we say, okay, an ideal dosage to start would be most certainly 7 days a week. And at the very minimum, in the morning and at night, and then a possible third flex option in the middle of your day. Generally, the best time to hit that third flex option is after a sitting marathon, right?
Mm,
So I've been sitting in a chair for an hour and a half. I've been in the car ride for 30 minutes, whatever it may be. We all run into these in various ways. But that there is a great opportunity to wash away the bad behavior with good behavior. So now you're looking at, remember, it's habitual, as I'm looking at changing my diet, I'm making good decisions not just Monday and Wednesday. I'm
mm-hmm.
making good decisions Monday for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, Tuesday for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay, for movement, it's the same way. What's your breakfast movement, right? What's your movement breakfast that you're going to kind of serve to the system? Because at the end of the day, you want to look at it as inputs, zeros and ones. Let's say zeros is WODA, ones is GOTA. At the end of the day, do you have more ones than zeros? Because if you start to stack more ones than zeros, you'll tip the scale over to the GOTA side. What we've seen be effective is that first part of let's make sure we can commit to this 7 days a week. If you can't commit to it 7 days a week, that one day that you spend relegated to the chair for 8 hours, guess what it just did? It put you right back where you were, or took you 2 to 3 steps back from all the great work that you did the 6 days before. Because what we have to understand is changing that habit is like climbing a mountain, right? So at the apex is your goal. There's the treasure of this go to 10, this ideal perfect 10 out of 10 score, in where my subconscious behavior is like Ed Reed's, where he's not thinking about it. It just is who he is. He couldn't walk crooked foot if you told him to, because it's so etched into his body. So if I'm thinking I want to get to that, well, you got to climb this mountain. Climbing that mountain requires reps. So you want to get ahead of it. You want to stack those inputs. We found that the best way is 7 days a week, at least 2 times a day. Now, as you're doing that, excuse me, the other way to bring more change is to gather more reps. We talked about this earlier, where your walking pattern is going to already be thousands of reps a day, right? Your time under tension sitting is going to be hours a day. But what if you're walking better, straighter feet, less heel bounce? What if you're sitting on the ground more instead of the chair? Do those things with the groundwork and see how big of a change you can make.
And so for the groundwork stuff, what are some easy things or maybe some resources people can go to for a little groundwork routine there?
Yeah. So sorry, I almost choked to death.
No worries.
I don't know if you guys are going through it wherever you're at, but we just been through like this sickness over here for like 3 weeks. I'm bouncing it back and forth. Kids have it. So what we always tell people is, and look, I've been mentioning it several times, the level 1 is the place to start. Because what we're going to do is we're going to break down what Goata is. I'm going to give you the theory, the philosophy, the origin of the system, so you understand the study. But we're also going to go through these exercises. So you'll have routines to do, right? Based off of your skill set, based off of what you're doing. You'll have 8 exercises to start to bring into your day-to-day. We'll show you how to walk better, and we'll show you resting posture. So I pushed everybody to the level 1 because it's going to give them the best understanding and the best place to start.
Awesome. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is I want to do more. I want to get some more cardio in my life, and I was thinking about jogging more, or running more, and maybe doing some like jujitsu, some martial arts stuff. But before that, obviously, I want to make sure my movement patterns are good enough where that isn't going to cause me any additional harm. So when it comes to something like running, which is traditionally so much of a heel strike, do you suggest people like avoid jogging in general? Do you think that you need to first make sure that you are more of that Goata versus Wota before you do an activity like that? Like, what would your advice be for someone who wants to get into some more running without all of those nagging injuries that people experience from running or jogging consistently?
Yeah, it's a great question. We get it a lot. I think some people are running because they think they need to. They think that it's part of what they have to do for cardio, and there's definitely some truth to that. You should be able to run. You should be able to enjoy going out there every single day and putting these miles on. But if you're waking up to this Wota Goata concept, if you're waking up to the awareness that I'm more on the Wota side of this, if you're someone that doesn't have to run, what I recommend is put it on the back burner for now. Let's work on your recode so that we can keep these inputs clean for the majority of the day. And then let's start to slowly interject it, right? So maybe half a mile for a week or two, full mile for the next week or two, right? Mile and a half. So let's break up the goal and kind of spoon feed it to the system over X amount of weeks. This way, you can keep a close eye on the pain. You can keep a close eye on the volume, because that's really the big issue here, is that if you're moving more Wota and you start to increase volume of your run, that's just bad reps that you're putting into the system. Like if you're running to the point of pain, you're running past the pain cave and you're putting that in the system, the more that you do that, you just got to do more Goata reps on the other side. So I think that there's, depending on what your assessment told me, depending on how much time you would give the system during the week, we could etch out, usually for someone that's young, pretty malleable, they can, make change within a 2 to 3 month period. I start to tell them, let's go at this like really direct and focused for a month at the very least. Let's get into some of the standing correctives. So let's work through the groundwork. Let's make sure we feel comfortable about these positions. Those are going to stay there in the system. Then let's start to bring in, got that dang reactions thing on. Then let's start to bring in the one time I was doing a podcast, like fireworks were going off, and I was like, what is happening? And I found out that at the top of the screen, your little like green camera, it's got like reactions on it. But
That's so funny.
nonetheless, you want to limit bad behavior and celebrate good behavior. So if the run is just going to bring out more WOTA, and it's not something that you have to do. Like it's toughest when I got an athlete because they're like, well, dude, I got to run. Like I can't stop. I'm like, okay, well then we got to do what we got to do with what we have in front of us. But if you're in control of that, what I often tell people is put it on the back burner, slowly start to on-ramp it. Maybe it's just one jog around the block. Take inventory. What does the foot feel like? What do the knees feel like? Is it feeling better? Use the run as an assessment. That way you're still kind of bringing it online. Maybe you can walk with a little more pace. You can walk as, run for a little bit, slow down, walk. Run for a little bit, slow down, walk. Use the Stairmaster. The Stairmaster gives you an opportunity to get cardio in, but really start to work on your steps. So there's ways to interject cardio in a safe manner for that person that has control over their inputs. It's not always possible based on, if you're an athlete or if you're in some sort of derivative, but I usually tell them to slow it down. I need you to find a good routine. Like I tell people when I get them to at least double leg work. So when we're trying to recode someone, like I'm trying to get your run fixed, Ryan, right? So when you're running, at the end of the day, like we use an all fours to single leg approach. Just like the child developing, they had 6 points of contact, 2 hands, both kneecaps, both feet in the ground, and they were working this Goata pattern that way. More points of contact, much easier to balance, much easier to align, much easier to disperse the pressure. Now, as I start to progress, I start to take pivot points away. Eventually, when you're out in your run, you got 1 point of contact in the ground. You've got 1 foot sticking in the ground, and that amount of pressure as you run starts to really explode. So they show that the pressure numbers, the force numbers in your sprint are even higher than any number you could possibly touch in a weight room. So when you look at it that way, we've got to get you ready for that single leg. So what I show people is we got to at least get you to double leg work, which is our bolt hold position. So we use the 6 point rocker. We tuck the toes. We use some crawling, obvious derivatives in the groundwork. Then we tuck the toes. We push back. We stand up. Once we get you to stand up work, then we can say, all right, start to bring the run back in a little bit.
I mean, it's fascinating. I've ran a few like half marathons, and throughout the duration of those runs, it's like you just see all these people running by you, and you just know that they're going to be in so much pain when this is over, because their movement patterns. It's like, oh man, I can't even imagine. It like makes me cringe looking at some people when they jog, and it's an epidemic like we described before. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That's why I wanted to ask the question, just because I've seen so many of these runners with these awful movement patterns. What's interesting about that, though, is a lot of the high level runners don't have those patterns. It's a lot of the everyday people who just want to run, who have these really bad patterns that are causing them to be in a lot of pain with it.
Yeah, the high level runner, like one thing I try to show people is, everyone is, for the most part, working a bow to a corner. It's not always pretty, but in general, if you start to really look, you see that there is a wiggle to the body. It's not a piston. It's not like a Lego. They're not running like this, like they're running straight up and down. There's a wiggle to the system. There's a wiggle to the leg and to the spine. It's a question of how durable is that wiggle movement. But as you look at high-level runners, you notice that they don't use as much of the heel as your everyday runner. They're more so in the ball of the foot. Yeah, they might have slight crooked feet. Yeah, the bow might not be as pretty, or the corner might not be as pronounced. But largely, they stay more on the forefoot, more on the front of the foot. I think your average runner, like when you're looking at those marathons, man, I see a lot of just clunk, clunk, very
Mm-hmm.
flat footed, very heavy heel. That's, I think, a big difference with your sort of bounding, springy sort of elasticity that you identify with that, high level marathon runner and that like weekend runner that's like just going out there for cardio, but
Mm-hmm.
like can't really stack the months, can't really get ahead of it because, man, every time I go and run for 2 months, my knee hurts. I got to stop. And then I just restart this cycle over and over again. I do see that a lot. And I do hear that a lot with family and friends, people that start to run like, oh man, I'm getting into running. And then the knee hurt. Well, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at those ACL tears and those Achilles tears that we talked about earlier, those are the big explosive moments where you're at the most risk because you're in a reactionary environment and you're in a two-way go. So the room for error is very small. When you're jogging, it's like death by 1,000 cuts because you're in control. It's a slower, more rhythmic control to the pattern. You're not going full speed necessarily. You're not in a reactionary environment where someone's going to run out at you. You control the pace. So when you see runners that have a bad pattern, the first run might not be the problem, the first week, the first month. But as they start to stretch it out and the cycles on the tire start to go, it's like a misaligned tire. Yeah, you can drive on that for a while. You might be able to do a road trip on that. But after a while, that thing's going to wear out. That misalignment of the car is eventually going to show itself, and the car is going to be in the shop. Same
Mm-hmm.
thing happens for your weekend runner. Whereas if we can use the recode, we can get ahead of that. By first, you got to be aware of it. You got to know why your left hip hurts. You got to know why your right knee hurts. That's the great part of the assessment, is that your awareness does so much to change habits. Because if you're not aware of something, you can't change something. So once you're aware of it, now you know what to look for. Now you know what to train for. And then all those things together make your running experience so much better because you're not just going to keep running to pain. You're going to run away from pain. You're going to get away from it. And you'll be able to finally get over that 1 month, 2 month sort of wall that you keep hitting in your running training. I even see this happen in lifting training, right? You go into a certain point, you get injured, you go to rehab, you go into a certain point, you get injured, you go to rehab. People get caught in this cycle. And then eventually they're too broken down to move anymore. They got to get their joints replaced. And now they think that they're old, but they're only 35, 45. They're still very young.
Yep. Yeah, I think we tend to not realize that how like resilient the body is, or just for a lot of the people who are these like part of the people that you guys studied at Goata, who are these 70-year-old
Mm-hmm.
athletes, like high level athletes. Like we don't realize that, if you have these right movement patterns, the body can move well for a long time. It's only from these bad movements that we've ingrained over years and years and
Mm-hmm.
years that we tend to deteriorate in our 30s or our 40s.
I mean, think about, we talked earlier, right? When we kind of set the stage for Goda, we set the stage for this new way of cataloging, diagnosing, treating the musculoskeletal, right? What's the thing that it does thousands of times a day? The walk. Okay, how many walking cycles, how many A to Bs do you get in a lifetime, right? So it's set up for longevity. It implies longevity, not only in your day, but most certainly set up over a lifetime. And if the connective tissue in the system, as they say, is probably set at a sort of almost a maximum of 120 years, man, when you're 30, you're kind of still a baby in a sense. I know we look at ourselves as if we're this old shell of our former, high school, athlete version, but the reality is you're still very young when you're 30, when you're 40, when you're 50. We feel old because technically the musculoskeletal is, the entropy is speeding up. You are breaking down much faster because you're moving in a WOTA pattern. But if you're moving in a GOTA pattern, the body is built to walk thousands of reps a day. Count that over a lifetime. I mean, it's astronomical. Sort of the obvious answer is that it's set up for longevity. Now, the other part of it is that, yeah, of course, there's resiliency in the system, as we just said, but we are also great at compensating, right? The body's not going to explode on the first bad step, thank goodness. But the body also doesn't get Arnold's bicep on the first bicep curl, right? So you have to work on that to build that bicep up over time. The same thing happens to the Goata behavior. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's like peeling string cheese. You won't blow your knee out necessarily on the first step, but you keep repping that out. You keep playing essentially Russian roulette with the behavior. Yeah, you can compensate. Yeah, you can get away with it for a little bit, but eventually it runs out, right? It's like that sand timer. Eventually you turn it over and it just runs out of time and it can't do it anymore and the injury happens. Whereas when you're in a Goata pattern, you're giving yourself the best chance because everything is organized, everything is harmonized. There is no death by 1,000 cuts. It's the leg, the spine, the foot. They're doing what they want to do in accordance with the design of the tissue, the design of the skeleton. They're doing what they have to do in accordance with the cycle of the musculoskeletal needing to be repped out thousands of times a day, countless times over a lifetime. Like I said before, if you believe that the system's created, you believe that it's intelligently designed, which I think if you look at it, whenever you see order and design, anywhere else that you look in your life that you see order and design, you know there's a designer. If there's a watch, there's a watchmaker. So the same idea with the body, when you're looking at it, clearly it's designed. So there's a designer. It's designed to do something. So it's not designed to break down. It's designed to have longevity. We know we're the world's most sort of gifted endurance athletes. This was some of the great work done by Christopher McDougall in Born to Run, right? They've studied this. Like, why are we so good at marathons? Why are we so good at running long distance? Well, look at our ancestry of having to be a hunter and a gatherer. Those are your claws and your fangs, essentially, right? Those are your abilities that you possess in the human body, is that you work in groups, you're an expert marksman, and you got this crazy endurance to the system. So I believe that it's built for longevity. It implies longevity, which means durability, but that can also be taken from you if you're off your mark. And I think that's what you're seeing, is that resiliency is being robbed. Even if we're able to compensate, we can only compensate for so long. Then eventually, boom, an injury happens. And now you get caught in that hamster wheel of rehab, train, injury, rehab, train, injury, and it drives people crazy.
Yep. So if you were to only have 10 exercises and this was for both strength and for movement longevity, what do you think those 10 exercises that you would be doing would be?
That's a great question. I mean, we've got that basically. That's what our RICO program is. So the archetypes that I would have present, because I show our coaches, look, if you see the archetype, you can see variety inside of that archetype. So the first one that I would make sure that I had to check off every single day is the all fours position, right? So this upside down inside ankle bone high. This, as you've seen it, we show you guys Seiza, the ground position, your toes are in, your heels are away. It's basically you take the standing version of inside ankle bone high, you flip it like a pancake. Now you rest in it, right? You've seen this instinctively with kids. We call it upside
So
down
that's
inside
Seiza?
ankle bone high. That's Seiza. Yeah, it's the foot shape that you see in Seiza is what we call upside down inside ankle bone high. Now, you take that same foot shape when you go to crawl. So I would have some sort of crawling derivative every single day. Then I would also have some sort of kneeling derivative every single day. And I would also interject the toe tuck position. So imagine you're the hunter-gatherer. You got to get up and down from the ground. The ability to tuck the toes, right? So picture samurai position, but now picture it where your toes are tucked. So your toes sitting. You're sitting on the toes as opposed to the top of the foot. You're kind of on that line where the toes meet the ball of the foot. So you quite literally rest on the head of the metatarsals of the foot and your heel bone is straight. So I would make sure that every single day I'm hitting upside down inside ankle bone high with my all fours, my crawling derivative. I'd make sure I'm doing my kneeling quarter squat, as we say, and then I'm doing some sort of toe tuck variation, right? So there's sort of like 4 concepts that we make sure are in our routines. We show these in the level 1, how to do them correctly. And then in our level 2, we start to show you how to do the standing work correctly. So that next bridge that we have to cross is, okay, I'm in my toe tuck. Picture your toes are tucked. You put your hands on the ground and you push back, and now your knees lift off the ground and you're just sitting in like a low squat position, right? Yeah, you could probably rest your heels closer to the ground in like a true resting squat, but you could also be in that like heel lifted squat that I call like the coach's squat. You know, a coach kind of like sits down in a squat. We've called it the Bolt squat. We've called it the Spider-Man squat. Like picture Spider-Man sitting on the perch where his heels are lifted.
Yeah.
He's got the two bows in his leg. That's our Bolt squat. So that's kind of our bridge to the standing exercises. That is a crucial exercise that we teach people, and it's very specific on how we have to orient that foot for the maximum ability to strengthen the arch, but also disassociate the ankle and the hip. So that's a crucial piece. Then from there, we're standing up. Now we're in our double leg with no hands near the ground. We're just kind of out there with, 2 feet in the ground. And that's another archetype that I would like to make sure I hit every single day. So you have really, upside down, inside ankle bone high, toe tuck, got this crawling derivative, this kneeling derivative, right? This double leg derivative. And then I want to hit a single leg exercise, right? So those 7 main concepts are really the X's and O's, the cornerstone of what we do at Goata, is that we hit those mainstays every single day. Now, for these, you don't need a weight room. You could do this barefoot with no equipment. When we're introducing it to the body, we'll use support, we'll take support away. When we want to add dynamics or load to these concepts, we can bring objects such as landmines, henny, weight in. But for the most part, if you're looking for like, if someone's like, okay, you only pick 10, yeah, I could probably add a couple weight exercises at the end, but you can get so much done with those basics that I just showed you there, which is you got to have a crawling derivative. You got to have some sort of kneeling derivative where you're on the knees and the tops of the feet are the toe tuck and your hands are sort of off the ground. This was a crucial part of the hunter-gatherer, being able to kind of work from all fours to 2 feet, work from all fours to 2 feet to a single leg. We hit this every single day, right? We were going up and down from the ground every single day. If you break those up, you can really create little areas to work out in. That's what our Recode program does. Level 1, we break it up into just the groundwork. So we use 6 points of contact and 4 points of contact in the level 1. In the level 2, we bring in 2 points of contact with support, without support, and then 1 point of contact with support, without support. And then we go into the performance, right? The weight room, the exercises that you start to do when you're like, well, I want to work out, I want to exercise. It's there as well. So that concept of all fours to single leg is what I would make sure I'm visiting every single day. And those would have been also similar to just a natural lifestyle of getting up and down from the ground every single day. Like we talked about, this natural lifestyle of eating, which would have been, well, yeah, I'm hunting and gathering, I'm eating fruits, vegetables, and meat. Well, there's a natural sort of progression to your movement that you would have hit every single day. You would have hit upside down, inside ankle bone high. You would have hit some sort of crawling shape. You would have hit toe tuck. You would have hit a double squat. You would have hit a single leg when you walk and when you run. So I need that to be present in my workout routine.
Rick, thank you so much for doing this today, brother. This was a absolutely fantastic episode. I'm always fascinated by Goata and just returning back to these natural ways of doing things. And I love what you guys are doing, and I so appreciate you coming back on the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on. Like I said, it's been really exciting to see the change in the system since the first time we talked.
Vice versa.
Anybody that's looking to learn more, I highly recommend you jump into our level 1 masterclass. It's a free masterclass, so all it requires is $100 deposit to save your seat. You can get your $100 back after the 3 weeks. So low risk, high reward. The reviews are great on it. People are learning what Goata means in a deep dive type of setting. We're going to give you guys 8 lessons to work on. You're going to have all this information available to you in our Kajabi library. You're going to have 8 exercises to work on. We're going to get on 3 Zoom calls together. I'm going to lead you through the Zoom calls. We're going to have a community group to talk back and forth. We're going to ask questions on the Zoom call. So it's a great opportunity to get high value, high sort of reward, and a lot of new information on the Goata system very quickly in a 3-week period. And then if you really want to kind of finish your recode and keep your progress going, we can jump into our level 2 course, which is great for coaches, great for people that want to help their community and make change there, or they just want to help themselves and meet their movement goals. I want to go run a marathon. I want to go play soccer with my friends. I want to go play basketball. I want to work this double leg and single leg. And so that's where I would start, guys. If you're listening and you're very interested in the Goata system, take a look at the level 1 masterclass. You won't regret it. High value, low risk, huge reward. You'll start to change the way your body feels, and you're going to start moving better right away.
Anywhere else you want to send people?
I would, if you're on Instagram, go to @Goata_movement. So that's our official page. From there, you can really kind of go anywhere else. You can click the link in our bio to go to the level 1 masterclass. You can find our Twitter page. You can find our homepage. You can find our YouTube, but we really direct most of it from that page, which is @Goata, GOATA_movement.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. Love what you guys are up to, and just really grateful that you took the time today.
Thanks for having me again, Ryan. It's always a pleasure talking with you. I appreciate you kind of asking these great questions and going on the deep dive. It's obviously something I always enjoy, and so I'm looking forward to the next time we get together.
Absolutely. Me as well.
Have a good one.